All right, we're live with Alexis Darevko. Hello, Mr. Darevko. How are you doing?
What's up, Josh? How are you, my friend?
I am doing well. Welcome to the Edlow podcast.
I never know never know where to look on these things. I'm
That's
supposed to look
okay.
at you. I'm supposed to look at the camera.
It's fine. Camera one, camera two. I mean, come on. You're a wrestler. You're a worker. You know about camera work.
The
So,
illusion. I'll just stare up at the wall.
oh man. So I have known you. How long has it been now? It was what 98 that we met at ProAm.
I actually think we met in late '97 before ProAm.
Oh yeah, where was that?
I could be wrong on this, but did somebody live in a mobile home park?
I did not. I might have known someone who lived in a mobile home park. I had lots of different types of friends.
Because so here's my memory, and it's California. So to say we were in a pool in like December really doesn't mean anything. Maybe it was early January. I know it was really a month or two before wrestling was a reality.
Mm-hmm.
And we were in the pool. And I want to say we were at my friend's, like my friend's mom lived in a mobile home, and you were there swimming with some people.
That's possible.
And that's how we connected. And you were like, oh, I went to a pro wrestling school. And I was like, where?
Yeah,
Then
that's possible.
a month later, I showed up.
Yeah, because you showed up shortly after I started.
I want to say I started like February 3rd or something like that.
Yeah.
How I remember that, I don't know.
So I was there for like 2, maybe 3 months before it shut down. And you came in like I think right after I did. It was me and Justin.
I was there for 4 months when it shut down.
Okay. Maybe I'm getting the time frame wrong. I just remember. Well, you know what? You might have. I don't know.
I think we only started like a week apart.
Yeah. It's crazy to think like right now.
Because I do know that the first thing I saw when I walked in, you were taking bumps.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
It's funny when you think about it. The people I remember, the people I talk to the most now from wrestling are the people I started with. I mean, it's Ollie, you. I talked to Justin quite a bit, who's now running Next Level Pro.
Right.
You're running Action Coast. And it's kind of cool to think that all those guys that started, I mean, PCW started with Schizo, think about the level of the amount of wrestling that came out of Pro IM just in that small group that was there in the 90s. And back in the day when there weren't 1,000 wrestling schools to go to.
And I don't remember what his name was because it's been so many years. But do you remember the guy who was like he dressed like he was from the 50s? What's that thing called? That style?
Oh, like a greaser? Or what are you talking about?
Yeah, kind of. Maybe greaser rockabilly? Is that what it's called?
Oh yeah, rockabilly. Yeah.
You remember that guy?
I don't remember that guy, but I remember the guy who did the Blues Brothers. He was like the Blues Brothers guy.
Maybe that's
he ended up going to Vegas to actually do that like full time. He was a Blues Brothers lookalike.
Okay, that's not the guy I'm talking about then, because the guy I'm talking about, like maybe 10 years ago, I was in the South, Georgia, maybe Tennessee, I don't remember. And this guy comes up to me and was like, why do you look familiar? And I was like, I don't know. I don't know anybody out here. And he goes, you're the California guy, right? And I was like, yeah. And he kept, and then 20 minutes later, he comes over. He was like, where do you live? I was like, I live in Sacramento. Then 20 minutes later, he was like, where'd you train? And I was like, well, I trained a lot of places. Tonga Kidd, I think I said just Oliver John. And he goes, oh, and he like totally remembered. But he had been in the South like since 98 and was like a big guy down there.
Like a worker? Like a wrestler?
Yeah.
Wow. Interesting. You remember his name?
No.
Yeah, I don't remember a lot of those guys' names.
I can barely remember the guys' names I met like 2 days ago. So
That's true. You know who else I recently talked to was Tom Bocci. You remember him he was at ProAm with us, and he kind of became a video guy, and he
Right.
did a
He
lot
has
of,
like a Netflix show.
yeah, he's a big time,
Yeah.
like he's a big time video guy now. I mean, he did some of that really cool video stuff for wrestling around here for a while he was getting his
Yeah,
bearings.
it was the territory.
Yeah, the territory. He did
Yeah.
that, and then
His
now
partner,
he's down in LA.
his partner Drake Nelson.
Yeah,
We're still friends.
yeah, he's the comedian, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, yeah.
That's,
Those
and that's another guy. I've known Drake for like probably 20 years too.
Yeah, it was really funny because before I started at Pro-Am, I went to an independent show. I think it was called National Wrestling Council. It was Jake the Snake. The main event was Jake the Snake Roberts and Coco Beware against Honky Tonk Man and Greg Valentine.
That was
And
TC Martin.
TC Martin, yeah, TC Martin was running it. And my dad and I went to the Memorial Auditorium, watched the show. Jake was methed out of his mind on the show. That was the first time I ever saw Sabu. I'd never seen him before.
I was gonna say that was the show with Sabu, right?
Yeah, Sabu wrestled Crash Holly. Yep. Yeah,
I was there.
Oh, were you? Okay, yeah. And this is before
I want to say, I think I was supposed to actually be on that show as
really?
like a referee because of my earlier stuff. Because of Paul Brown. So, but then I just went there and they were like, just sit in the crowd. And I was like, oh, all right.
So wait, you started training before you came to Ollie's?
No. So it's kind of a crazy story. So my friend John, who was like my older friend growing up, I think he was like 3 years older than me in school or something. He was dating some girl. And one day she was like, oh, my cousin's a professional wrestler. And I was like, and I'm probably, 14 or 15 at the time. So John's like 16 or 17. And she's like, yeah. And they didn't call it indie wrestling then. They just, I don't even know what the hell. It wasn't called indie wrestling. I know that. And she's like, come to my house later, whatever, that week. And sure as shit, there was this like 6'5" dude with a mohawk and like kind of looked like the Road Warriors. And he was the Executioner, maybe. I don't remember what his gimmick was. And sure as shit, like they had a show at Cordova High School, which was my high school. It was Paul Brown's WCWA, and Pitbull Johnny Payne beat up some fan. Well, I found out like 20 years later that fan was Big Money Bill Monroe.
No kidding.
Yeah. And
Big Money. My first pro match was Big Money.
So, that's just one of those things. And then it was, and they used to do a lot in the Bay. And then we started going to the shows in the Bay Area, probably after, I don't know, 5 or 6. It was like, hey, can you guys wear security shirts? Then it was, can you guys take tickets? One point was, hey, can you ref a match? It was like, I don't know what I'm doing. And it was just learn on the fly. No one told me anything. I didn't even know what the finishes were.
So these weren't all pro wrestling matches. This was something else going on out there?
No, it was Paul Brown's show.
Oh, okay.
It was the old kind of carny way of doing things. They had, like Big Money wore a mask as a character, and then he was Big Money.
Oh, interesting.
Paul Brown was Paul Brown, and then he wore a mask. And I think he was Jason. Who wears the hockey mask? Jason?
Jason, yeah.
Yeah, he was Jason.
Was Hustler working back then too?
Hustler might have been behind bars at that point. I don't.
Hustler was put away for a minute.
Yeah. The ones I really remember are Paul Brown, Big Money, and Johnny Payne.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I wasn't really wrestling or anything. I was just kind of hanger-on, as I like to call them. And I started meeting people. But I didn't know. I thought everyone was making fucking $1 million a year and just working gymnasiums at Cordova High School.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, it's so funny how back then, and you were like this too, I think, how rabid I was about wrestling. I mean, like I remember a guy who my mom was a caretaker for, an older guy. And, you know, he was real close with the family and he wanted to be, you know, he wanted to be friends with me or whatever. And I was kind of, you know, ruffian, you know, high school kid. I didn't want to talk to anybody, especially somebody who was as old as he was. And he called one time, and I had been asked to go to some homecoming to some other school with a girl. I was kind of seeing her at the time. And he called my mom and was like, hey, there's All Pro Wrestling came and they were running a show somewhere. And I'd never, you know, back then there wasn't an indie show every week like there is now. You know what I mean? It was very rare that anything came around. And I was like, something other than WWF, like that sounds great. But it was the same night as that homecoming. And my mom had to talk me out of ditching the date and be like, nah, that's cool. I won't go to homecoming. I want to go see this indie show. I want to talk to these guys because I wanted to get into wrestling. And then
that wasn't the second night of the first Young Lions Cup, was it?
I don't think so. They had,
where was
I
it?
remember they had I think Vic Grimes was on the show. I remember that because I remember thinking he looked a lot kind of like he was wearing a mask like Mankind almost, I think.
Right. Yeah, he wore a mask at one point.
Yeah, and then and they had what's his name that was on the Mike Modest was there, and was it Brian Thompson?
Yeah,
they
Rick Thompson.
They were all on the show, and I was like, I had heard about them because I think an article had come out in Pro Wrestling Insider about them, or Pro Wrestling Illustrated about them, being kind of like the big the indie no one knows about, the big indie no one knows about. So I was really excited about it, and then my mom just was like, no, you committed to go to this homecoming, you got to go. And I was like, okay, fine, I can't be a jerk. So I went to the homecoming, and I had a good time. She was great. She was a great girl, but yeah, and then I saw an article in the Sac B about ProAm, and I was there the next day. I was like, and it was funny because I think it was, I don't know if it was AAU or rec ball. I was playing basketball. It was off season, but I was playing basketball, and I was like, I'm done playing basketball. You know, that was it. I was like, I don't want to get hurt for wrestling, you know? And my dad was like, no, you have to finish. I get you want to do this, but you committed to the team. And I was like, I know. So I would go and I'd play a game on like a Thursday night, and right after the game get dropped off at Pro-Am. So I'd play, you know, 2.5 quarters of a game and then go all sweaty and do 2 hours of wrestling. I mean, that's how hardcore, not that I'm like a great, you know, athletic guy. I was just saying, like, I was so into it. I didn't care what I had to do.
See, and we have similar things. When I started was the end. I always call it the end of my college career. I was on the soccer team or the football club, and I couldn't make practice a lot. And I had to talk to Paul and said, well, is there anyone here in the mornings? I said, I'm an athlete. I don't have to go to school.
Right.
And he was like, yeah, if you come in at like 7 in the morning, you can work out with me. Okay. So a lot of times it was me and Paul, and Ollie would pop in here and there. And then I'd make like one night class for the, 4 months. But that's, I think, was better for me because I was wrestling Paul DeMarco every day.
Yeah.
3 days a week by myself. And he loved me because, believe it or not, I had great cardio back then from running up and down a soccer field for 90 minutes straight.
Right.
And it was great, and then I had my first match in August. I started in February. So, yeah.
Yeah, Paul was such a good, I mean, he was interesting. He was kind of a strange guy, but he was really cool. Like he taught me a lot. It was funny. So after my first match, I thought this was so great. And to be fair, like I'd never actually finished training, I mean, I only trained for 2 or 3 months. I didn't know what I was doing at all. But because I was big and I had a following from my backyard stuff, because I started that backyard wrestling promotion, and
Right.
it got really big because it ended up, backyard wrestling back then was the thing. It was all over reality TV. It was all
Cool. And
over.
it had its own video game.
Yeah. And so I was on every TV station and the radio by the time I got the call from Rich Roby to help out with the start of what became later Supreme Pro Wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
And so they knew I could draw, and so like they didn't care if I could really work. They just saw he's 6'7", 275, and he has a draw. He draws. Let's get him on the show. And so I use the the pro loosely because I didn't feel like I was a pro at all.
Right.
But I was like not going to turn it down,
Yeah.
And so when I showed up, or I had the match with Big Money, I called Paul right after. And I just said, hey, I just wanted to say I just had my first pro match. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And he goes, what'd you get paid? And I said, and I was like, actually, I didn't. I did this one, what I call, as a lawyer, I call it pro bono, right? I was like, I didn't get paid anything. And he goes, then you're not a pro yet. Call me when you're a pro. I was like, got it. So the next match I got paid.
I remember. It's funny is, I don't remember the guy's name, but it was a church up in. My memory's so bad. It's either Cameron Park or El Dorado Hills. I can never remember.
Mm-hmm.
They were running a show, and he knew Paul, and Paul's like, "You're on the show."
Hmm.
And I ended up working a guy who was from Jesse Hernandez's school down in L.A. At least I think it was Jesse Hernandez's school. And it's funny thing is he's actually a lawyer now. The guy I'm talking about.
Uh-huh.
But I remember because Paul was there and the promoter gave me $50.
Oh, nice. That was a good payout back then.
First match. All right.
Right.
And Paul, I would say he got mad, but he was like, that's all you got? There was 500 people there. And I was like, what was I supposed to get paid? No one told me. I was like, you guys never even told me about finishes. Like,
yeah. I remember Paul telling me, because I showed up right after that National Wrestling Council show. And I remember Paul saying that TC Martin had called him for workers. And he said, okay. And I think, Paul loved him to death, but I don't think he understood the indie way at that point. He was used to the 60s and 70s where everyone was getting paid a good clip no matter who they were on the show.
Right.
And he was surprised because he said, I'll give you 4 guys $100 a guy. And TC Martin was like, no, that's cool. I could get a carload of guys to come up from LA for $25 each.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, okay, well, if you want guys who just want to pretend, want to come up and not get paid anything and pretend to be wrestlers, that's fine. I got real wrestlers here. And he was right. I mean, like, Ollie, and I can't remember the name of the guy, but he was the guy who ended up being like an economist, and he was jacked to shreds. I mean, the guy was huge. And those 2 guys were the guys that worked that show against Frank, like in front of Frank Shamrock, that looked almost like an MMA match. I can't remember the guy's name, but he was gigantic.
Was his name Chris?
I don't remember. Ivan was there too, and Ivan, that was before he gained a bunch of weight. Like, he was looking jacked too at the time. I mean,
that was when Ivan got out of the military.
Yeah, he was jacked. He was jacked too. They were all like, I walked in and I go, holy crap, everyone here is huge. Like, they all were gigantic. And so he had they were all legitimate workers. They were wrestlers,
Mm-hmm.
and so, but yeah. And so, it's just so interesting because then, after the little time I had on the indie scene, working those few matches and working, for that year or whatever it was that I was working after they closed down, you kept on. And it was really interesting because I remember coming back after going on my mission 2 years later, and I showed up to a show. I think Jim Cooley was running it. It was one of those Juggalo shows. And I think you were there, and Justin was there, and Hustler was there, and Big Money was there, and Warpath, and all those guys. And just seeing that, like, you and Justin had stuck with it was really cool to me, because there was a big, a lot of people don't make it. A lot of people don't finish.
I couldn't count. You can give me 100 people with 1,000, or whatever. But I couldn't count the amount of people who had one day's training and quit, or trained for 6 or 8 months or a year, and then had like 3 matches and you never saw them again.
Yeah. Well, I used to tell when I was running the power gym with Ollie back 10, 12 years ago or whatever. I used to tell when people would come in, I would say 1 in 10, and they're like, "What do you mean?" I'm like, 1 in 10 make it. 5 don't make it out of the first week. 3 don't make it out of the first month. 1 will finish and become a worker. And that's true. That's what happened.
And if you take 10 of those people who become workers, 1 of them stick around.
Yeah, well, and that's what's so interesting is what I found so interesting is that you guys have stuck around even more so than me. Like I've stuck around, but I haven't worked in forever. I mean, I hadn't worked since I did 1 match after my mission.
That'll change soon.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, no, I'll talk about that. Like, that was interesting because I was not planning on getting back in the ring ever. But when I met Johnny Jeter, it just felt like, well, if I was ever going to do it, like,
right.
This is the time. I met Johnny through Dave Dutra.
Right.
Dave called me and said, "Hey, Johnny Jeter from former guy from the Spirit Squad, the WWE, moved to Cameron Park and he's setting up a ring. Do you mind coming up here and helping us set it up?" And I was like, "Yeah, I mean, sure." I was a little surprised he didn't know how, because I didn't know his story. I was like, he doesn't know how to set up a ring, and I was like, okay, well, yeah, sure. And so we went up there and he knew how. He just needed some help with the ropes and stuff. But yeah, and then I got to talking to him because I didn't know his story. And he started telling me, his story, and I figured it out. He was at OVW when it was, he was training with Cena, Brock Lesnar, Randy Orton, Batista, like, all those guys. And then all the guys who, and then you think about it and think about the guys he's in the ring with. They did a program with DX. He worked with Ric Flair. He worked, he worked with Chris Benoit. He worked with William Regal. He's worked with everybody, and he learned from the best, right? And so he tells me, he's like, "Yeah, I'm doing a wrestling school. Like, why don't you come and train with us and all that?" And I just was like, I hadn't even thought about it, but I was like, well, I'm in kind of the best shape I've been in since I was wrestling, right? And I was like, it's not like I got a lot to do, so it's like, with 4 kids and a busy law practice. But I was like, I looked at it and I said, what am I gonna do? You know what I mean? Like, right. What better chance I have? Because no disrespect to all the wrestling schools out there, but it's like all those wrestling schools out there are kind of like, a lot of those guys have never really, like, a lot of these guys who are running wrestling schools, they just haven't been to the WWE. They're great trainers. But when you think about Johnny's former tag team championship partner is a road agent right now for the WWE. You know what I mean? And you're just like, so I just said to myself, I just said to myself, I go, well, if I was wanting to learn, if I ever wanted to finish, other than Oliver John, who's not training anybody anymore and is moving on, I can't think of anybody else around here or anywhere near here that would have as much knowledge to impart and put the polish on what I'd want to do than Johnny. So I signed up and I've been with him ever since. And he's so good. The thing that's good about him that I love is he's so nitpicky. About everything. We've been doing matches and, we've been doing matches, 10, trying to get to 15 minutes, just working. And he'll pick a move and he'll just be like, this looked like garbage. Here's what you could have done better to make this look better. You really got to think about this, and he'd be like, you can do what you want. I know what I would do, but this is what this is what you can do. And it really, like, it's interesting because when I go to indie shows, and I watch, because he's all about the storytelling. He's all about, those types of things. And I mean, he really trains you the right way, because then I'll go to an indie show and I'll look at guys and I'll go, this is what he's talking about. This is the stuff that some people are missing. Like I can tell who is being trained his way and who is not, right? Because of the way that and so just hearing that from him, and just even there are some days in training where like we don't, if we're really tired or we do a ton of cardio, we do a ton of strength and conditioning. And then rather than doing a bunch of stuff in the ring, we're really spending a lot of time just hearing his stuff, like talking to us about it or watching a tape, and doing things like that. And it's like, wow, I'm light years ahead, and I need that because I'm old. I'm 41. I don't have a lot of years on this. It's really something. So yeah, I'm doing it. We're probably going to be, probably taking, I don't know when I'm going to take bookings. I got my wrestling boots, just a few days ago, and
those are nice. I saw the picture.
Yeah. I got some nice boots, and looking forward to maybe going out there, and really, like, I don't even know what I'm trying to do. I just want my kids to kind of see me wrestle and get to wrestle my friends. Like you and I, we never got to wrestle,
No.
I mean, we've known each other for 25 years and I've never been in the ring with you.
Right.
I mean, we've done stuff.
And it's funny because it's like it's like, me, Ugly, Flacco, Doc Atrocity, all the guys who've been around that 25-year range. It's like, did you ever wrestle any of them?
None. In fact, I was there. So I think this is okay to say. I hope he's okay with it. But Big Ugly's first match was actually, his first official match was the same day as my first official match, right? Mm-hmm. But his first unofficial match was in my backyard the night before.
Oh, wow. What I mean?
And so, it was a situation where we had brought the ring up for the first SPW show, and I brought it the night before, and I was doing big backyard parties with Backyard Wrestling. So we put the ring up there, and I mean, it was like 300 people showed up. It was huge. The cops ended up breaking it up. But yeah, Ugly was there. And,
that's right.
And so, yeah, but then, I did 3-4 more shows with SPW. It was before he took over. And
back then they only ran every other month, right?
No, they were running monthly. They were running monthly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they were running monthly, but it was.
See, and that's the funny thing about SPW is, I think they started in what, 99?
2000.
2000?
2000, yeah.
I don't think I even heard about SPW until like either 02 or 03.
Yeah.
And I was wrestling every weekend and never heard of them.
What's so funny is that when I look back on that show, and I've shared this with these guys before, that it was also CJ's first match, CJ Kurz, formerly Dante.
Oh yeah.
His first match was there. There were a bunch of guys who aren't there. Jesus Cruz, that was his first match. His first match was in my backyard, and then that night too. Like, and it was really cool. And I remember also that was the first time I ever met Coach Joey Nuggs, formerly known as Joe Applebomber, and I got to tell you, that guy, to me, I've always had such respect for that guy, because he was real tough, and he was real kind of scary to a younger guy like me.
Yeah.
But you know what? Under that exterior, he was the sweetest guy. You know what I mean? Like he really kind of gave me some great advice, after that, and just was a really nice dude. And I could tell that it wasn't like a, like when I talked to him over the, when some guys are working you, he didn't need to give me any advice at all.
Right.
But he just saw me and came up to me and he said, this is what you could do better. You really need to finish training. If you did, you would be really great, that kind of thing. And he said, he's the one who recommended, and I thought about doing it, to go over to the Wild Samoan School out east and or to the Monster Factory. Mm-hmm. He's like, you need to go to one of those two schools. If you did that, you'd probably get signed.
Probably.
And I was like, wow, that's really nice of you to say, And, yeah. Well, yeah. And it was so cutthroat back then, And I think, I think Boyce LeGrand was on one of those shows back then. I mean, it's just crazy to think like some of these guys are still around.
Because see, by 2000, I was mainly wrestling in LA. Because there was nothing here like Woody Farmer's Bay Area Wrestling, and APW and Big Time Wrestling was around.
But they were really closed back then. Like you had to be one of.
Oh yeah, if you weren't training there, you weren't on their shows.
Yeah.
I did. I don't think I did a Woody Farmer show later. Then maybe a couple years later when it was like they hadn't run for a couple years.
Yeah.
And I think it was in Pleasanton or Simi Valley Pleasanton, I think is what it was.
Yeah.
I did a couple shows for them later on, in their promotional era. But I was in LA a lot because back then it's still the same. LA's always had 700 promotions,
right?
400 lucha libre promotions, 400, regular indie wrestling promotions. So you used to be able to go down there and work like 6 times in 3 days and maybe not make a ton of money, but you get 30, 40, 50 bucks, but if you did it 6 or 7 times in a weekend, you did okay.
Yeah. At least enough to cover your transportation and your food and a little bit.
And back then things were a lot cheaper too. So
yeah.
Well,
that's awesome. And now, so tell me, okay, so I remember also for a brief moment, I went and started training a little bit with Tonga Kidd at their school, and you were there too, kind of putting polish on your stuff. That was probably like 2003.
No, that was maybe
2002.
I think maybe more 02, because I think so. It was, I did the stuff with Paul and Ollie again. It was a very short time frame. Went on the wrestling. I got hurt. When did I get in the car accident? 99. So from like August of 99 to probably December or January 99 into 2000. I didn't wrestle because I broke my back in a car accident.
Ooh.
Luckily for me, I wasn't paralyzed. It's a break in your back. It's not you break your back. But I couldn't do anything. And it was one of those things where like, you're never going to wrestle. And I was like, pretty sure I am.
Yeah. Ric Flair did it. You could do it.
Yeah. And I was like, so then in 2000, I actually ended up going to a show with a friend. Actually, it was Rick. And
Rockwell?
Yes. And no, I went to a show I met Rick at that show. I think I went with Brian Hilton, King's executive producer for the Sacramento Kings. I ended up meeting Tonga at the show. He said to me, he was like, "Don't I know you?" And I said, "Yeah, we've worked a couple shows together. I got hurt. He goes, "Come train with me." Back then, we were setting up the ring at like some park over off Bradshaw, I think it was, and like training for like 5 hours in the blistering sun. It was miserable.
That sounds terrible.
But it gave you that push. That, do I really want to do this? Because if I do, I'm going to stay.
Yeah.
And I was there every day, or every time we trained. Then they got a building. Probably like the middle of 2000, something like that. And I got keys to the castle, literally. And I was there 7 days. When I wasn't wrestling, I was there every single day. Just, even though I was by myself, I wasn't doing anything dumb. I would just take the rolls and the bumps and do all the stuff you learn as a beginner. I think by the time you would come back from your mission and you would come train with us. And that was sort of, I had just started, at that point it was probably 4 years in, I think, when you would kind of come around. I was starting to hit my stride. Like I knew kind of what I was doing. I knew how to get over. or just barely, starting to get there, because it took a really long time for me. Like, there's always the joke that I was Jesse and Coyote and all these Billy and all these other gimmicks that I had, because I was always trying to figure out what I was. I knew who I wanted to be, but it was always like, oh, somebody does that here. You can't do that. You can't do this. And I was like, let me talk. No one ever wanted to let anyone talk. Like, if you remember shows back in the day, like, to be honest, the first guy I ever heard talk on the mic in the Indies was Doc Atrocity.
Yeah.
When he was
he's good.
And I was like, I can do that. Like, let me talk. And no, we're going to give you a manager. I was like, this guy sucks. Why are you having him talk for me? And I remember one time I was in somewhere in like Central California, and they had this guy who was literally, I think he was like an accountant or something. And he was a good talker because he was a public speaker, basically.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I took the mic from him and I told him to shut up. And I cut this promo on who we were wrestling. And afterwards, the promoter was like, well, you're not going to have a manager anymore. You're going to cut your own promos. And I was like, thank you.
Nice.
And then it was probably, well, the entire time I've known Johnny Payne, he called me the Russian. He was always, he pushed and pushed and pushed. And I was like, who's going to fucking believe that? Oh, sorry, I cussed. Who's going to believe that I'm Russian? And it was a Paul Brown show. I showed up and he goes, do you have red trunks? And I was like, I have a black singlet. Like, it's what I have. It's what I wear. And he goes, okay. And he like went and dug under the ring and found a chain. He goes, you're Russian tonight. Figure out a name. And I was like, what?
Yeah. So how did you come up with Alexis Darevko?
So I was Alexis Smirnoff Jr. first because of Johnny. So I was Alexis Smirnoff Jr. from like the summer of 2003. Might be off by a year, but I can't remember. It's been a long time. And he did that for 2 years. And I don't know if you remember, they used to think that Smirnoff was dead, or we were told he was dead, and I don't really know if it was his kids or not, but they started harassing me online about using Smirnoff Jr. And I was like, first off, it's Junior. I'm not saying and I don't think I've ever even said he was my dad. I just said, I'm Alexis. You'll get this. I talked to a lawyer. A lawyer said, you're going to win, but it's going to cost you $10,000.
Of course.
Right.
Right.
And he goes, just change your name. There was a show on TV called Alias with Jennifer Garner. It's kind of how she got famous, and how she became Elektra and all that. Her mother was a Russian spy, and she was Irina Darevko, but they spelled it with a C and not a K. And I was like, and I think it was DER, not DAR. And I just changed it around, and that's how I became Darevko.
Interesting, man.
Actually, and I was supposed to be Vladimir Darevko, but I screwed up at a show. It might have been the first Devil Mountain Wrestling show. The ring announcer didn't show up, so I was the ring announcer behind the curtain, and I believe it was me and Sean Sims and maybe Hellfire in a match or something. I don't remember who I wrestled. So of course I had to introduce them first, then I could go out. And I started to say, Alexis, that's not my name, Darevko, and I just went out. So, and they're like, what happened to Vladimir? And I was like, I forgot my name. And
it just stuck, huh?
And it became like the next time we had a show, somebody had a sign, and I was like, well, it can't be Vladimir now.
Right.
And it just stuck. So Sean Sims still calls me Vladimir. It's funny.
That's funny. So when I started SWF wrestling, the first show, you were the one I contacted because I was like, I'm going to start this promotion. I want to come out and just kind of see what the talent's like. And you brought me to a Devil Mountain show. And you know what was so funny about that? This is what I remembered about Devil Mountain, because it was in that kind of that old boys and girls club that you guys were doing, and the ring was kind of it was old, and
More janky than old.
yeah, I didn't want to say it, but now that you said it, yeah, it was kind of janky, and the setup was kind of, I looked at it and I walked in and I go, ah, man, like, I hope the wrestling's good, and it was like, I remember the first match out was Jesus and Riv, and they went at it, and I was like, oh wow, that was that was good, and then from there on, I can't remember who was on the show. I remember I was like, the next couple matches, I was like, I'm not super impressed necessarily, but then you did the 4-way. It was you and Sheik. And then it was Hustler and Big Money. It was Otis and Maynard, and then it was the Twins, and that was before the intermission. And I remember thinking in that show, like that, I looked at all that and I go, these are guys I could work with. Like these are guys that I could book. All 4 of the teams were just good, and the Commandos at the time, they came out and they were so energetic, and the crowd responded so much. This is what I need, and you guys put on a great show, and I booked all 8 of you guys, later on down the road.
And I think that with that match, just naming all those guys, we all had characters.
Yeah, and you all looked, even though you guys, you did a lot. Some of you didn't look like the traditional, WWF bodybuilding wrestler. You all had real gimmicks. You all had real, you guys had, you all had, you were all animated. And you guys clearly knew what you were doing,
And the thing was, I mean, because clearly Sheik was the smallest person in that match, but we all were believable.
Yeah.
It's like, and I've said it for years, and I know I stole it from Johnny Valentine, but you might not think pro wrestling is real, but I'll make you think Alexis Darevko is real.
Yeah.
And I tell guys now is, because my job nowadays is sort of to teach the young guys and bring them along. And I wrestled a guy on Saturday who I think he's probably had 15 or 20 matches in his life. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to have so much fun with him, but I worked a guy a couple weeks ago in Colorado, and he was even older than me, and Riv was actually in that match. And I was like, does he know? Like, we were looking at each other like, does he know that we're going to beat each other up? Like, should we go talk to him? Because I was like, hey, man, like, lay your shit in. You're not going to hurt us.
Right.
And he was like, oh, yeah, no, it's cool. But
was he surprised?
I know his chest was a little beat up and from the chops that Riv and I were giving him. I don't know if he really liked it, but hey, whatever.
Well, that's the thing that I've always found so interesting was NorCal wrestling is traditionally known to be real stiff. I think that's kind of disappeared a little bit.
I don't like the word stiff, because to me stiff means hurt. Snug.
Yeah. Okay.
Hard in safe places.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's actually really it's cool, because I remember when I saw, and I think that this has improved quite a bit since I started SWF. I think a lot of people have done it now. Was that back then it just seemed like the way I described it, wrestling was kind of being it was like serving steak on a paper plate. Like there was a lot of good wrestlers. Everybody was good and everybody knew what they were doing. And even so now, like the old timers, the guys who know, the Johnny Butabis and you and the Riv and Dutra and these guys who've been around for 15 years, they know what they're doing, and they know, a lot of guys can keep it simple and still get over. Flacco's like that. They know what they're doing. but the production value was kind of a lot lower back then. And now, and it could be also that houses are up, right? Like the crowds are getting bigger, so there's more money to play with. But like, I remember thinking, I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to look for like quality. The wrestlers are great. It's just getting quality, quality production. And now
I also think there's a big, I mean, if you even just go with production, I could film an entire show on my phone and it'll look like I filmed it with a $10,000 camera.
Yeah, that's true. It's a lot easier now to get your hands on that production. But I'm not talking about video necessarily. I'm talking about just you walk into the show, like you said, you walk into Devil Mountain, and no disrespect, like what's his name who used Hellfire, he did a great job with what he had. You know what I mean? But you walk in there and it just looked kind of like, yeah, this is a $10 a ticket production. You know what I mean? And so, but then over the course of time, that really improved everywhere. Like now you go to a show and you don't have a problem paying $20 to come in or $25 to come to a show because it looks like a legit show. And the workers are are better than they were, and so it's really kind of cool to see. And also it's proving that way because more and more NorCal guys they're actually living off of wrestling. A lot of guys have and ladies have made it now. And I think that's super impressive. Some of them came through the Power Gym, not trained just with us, but I mean, came in for a session or two. Like we had Brian Cage show up, Jeff Cobb showed up, Matthias was with us for a while. She went and did, Savoy, who ended up, she was in NXT for a while and did Shimmer and all that stuff. I mean, they were Ring of Honor. Yeah, she did all that.
She's even done AEW.
Oh, has she? I don't remember being on AEW. I remember she did the Mae Young Classic with NXT.
She was in the I don't know, it was like 2 years ago. They did the women's tag team tournament.
Oh, yeah.
It was her and I think Big Swole.
Oh, okay. Yeah, she was another one that was really good. I mean, they came through.
Japan, she did Japan a lot.
Yeah. I think Thunder Rosa came through. She had just started training and came through once or twice.
She was there because I remember her being there.
Yeah. So, and it's just cool to see all these people who, you kind of knew and we met, make it. And I think it just makes the whole area look so much better. Now one thing that you've been kind of known for and what people have in wrestling around here have kind of, I guess, touted for you is that you're a guy who gets a lot of people chances places. I've noticed that like a lot of guys herald you as the first guy to give them a shot. Things like, Johnny Butabi was a guy who really talked about that you were one of the first guys to kind of get him, out there. Same with Riv and Levi. You were one of the first. I remember when Levi was breaking in and you were like,
Levi. Levi's the only person I've ever trained.
Yeah. And you were the guy who was like, this guy is money. And there were a lot of people who were like, I don't see it. You know what I mean? And I remember because I booked him a few times, and there were a lot of guys who didn't get it. And man, like he's one of the best, he really gets it. He's so old school. And, but you were the first guy to really give him a shot. And there's a lot of guys like that. How did that happen? How did you become the guy who at least had the relationships that you could get these guys chances?
So it kind of started from the beginning. I mean, from the minute I got in the business, I would get asked. Like I was, I'd be at shows. Hey, what do you think we should do on this show? And I'm like, I don't fucking know. I just want to wrestle. And I always joke that I went from being like training to wrestler in office all at the same time. And a lot of promoters were older when I got in the business, and even if they were wrestlers, they weren't traveling at that point. And they'd say to me like, hey, if you're in Arizona or Las Vegas or Sacramento and you see somebody that is worth bringing down to LA, let us know, or bring them with you. We'll put them on the show no matter what. So it kind of started from there.
Was that something, but sorry to interrupt you, but was that something that you were looking for? I mean, was that something that you wanted to eventually be? Were you somebody who, wanted to just be kind of in the office? Because like right now, I feel like even though, I mean, you're a little bit older like me, you've been working nonstop for 20 years now. So I mean, your body's even more, yes, you're more broken up than I am, so I kind of view you, even though I know you work select shows, you're really more of a guy focusing on promoting and growing the business, right? Like you have Action Coach Wrestling, you have I know you're deeply involved, or at least you have been in the past, and it seems like you're back into dealing with East Bay Pro Wrestling. I know you did some battleground stuff when it was in LA. Now it's in Colorado. It looks like you're kind of helping them out there.
Definitely office there, yeah.
Yeah, so like those types of things. I mean, did you ever view yourself that way?
No, because here's the thing is, I didn't know about that. Like I knew there was promoters, but I didn't know there was bookers and agents, even though I read like Pro Wrestling Illustrated and all those magazines, I never really read the inside stuff. All I cared about was the results and who the champions were, and maybe if there was an article that was interesting, I'd read it. So I never knew the inside stuff. Even in the business, I knew a guy would say like, "You're wrestling so and so, and he's winning in 9 minutes." And I go, "Okay." But it happened right away, and then guys would say to me, "You're a scout, or you're an agent, or whatever." And so being in the inside of pro wrestling in the backstage never once was an interest to me growing up. I wanted to be Arn Anderson. I wanted to be Ric Flair. I wanted to be, those type guys. But when it started to be explained to me and the usefulness of knowing more than just how to wrestle was important, because what if I did break my neck and I couldn't wrestle, I want to be involved in the business, I could at least have an eye for talent. And I mean, I think I've proven that I'm pretty good at figuring out who's going to be good and who's not. So as it has gone over the last 20 years, 22, whatever it's been, 24 years, it's become something I love to do now. Like I was asked today, like, "Hey, can you find us 2 guys for a show?" Okay, let me see what I can do for Saturday. Like at Battleground, I don't think we have defined rules yet because it's sort of new back to Pete after 8 years of not running shows. I'm probably going to be an agent or something backstage when we get all that figured out, because all of his agents aren't going to live in Colorado. There's one in New Mexico, one in Indiana, and 2 in California, one in SoCal, one in NorCal. So, but we're going to be the guys going. I mean, I know I've got guys booked on the next show just off my word. Hey, book this guy. He's great. So getting into that, I probably like it more than even wrestling. Like I know Big Ugly has said, if he could just train people, he'd be the happiest guy in the world. If I could just be the booker and create shows, I'd love that. I still want to wrestle here and there. I tell everyone now, getting on in years and in wrestling, I'm not going to wrestle forever. I know that. I would love to, but I am Ric Flair.
Yeah.
I'm on the Shaq said, I'm on the 365 program. I'm going to go every year. I'll decide what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
Because I don't think I'll ever really retire, but because it might be one of those things, like, who knows, maybe someone needs a surprise tag partner, maybe to build a gate up, something like that. And even with East Bay, I could walk in there right now and just be like, that's dumb, change it. And they probably will change it. You know, so I'm sorry. What did you ask me?
Oh no, I just wondered, is that something that you really looked for? It sounds like it's just kind of something that organically grew, and you noticed that you had an eye for
okay. Yeah,
talent.
no, it was very organic. I never, because I didn't know about it.
You know, it's funny what you said about running shows. You know, yeah, I think if I were to do it again, because that was the thing, I got burnt out. I mean, I ran SWF wrestling for I mean 3 or 4 years probably, you know, consistently. And when I did that, I mean, you know, we had really a lot of success really quickly. And I know that a lot of that was just based on business acumen and just you know, being somebody who's different. You know, a lot of these guys who do wrestling, they're wrestlers. But as far as like if you're dealing with someone in business, if you're dealing with like a fair or a school or whatever, it's nice to be like, yeah, I'm a lawyer. You know what I mean? You know, you know, I have a business background. You know, I've been in management before. You know, it gives you the kind of a credibility. Like these guys don't, you know, these people don't know anything about wrestling. So, you know, that kind of helps out. And I know when we were doing Impact Wrestling, they liked that. And I know that when we did Lucha Libre USA, they liked that. They liked that, like, I wasn't just some, you know, I wasn't just a wrestler. Like I actually had like business backgrounds.
You weren't some guy with a mullet walking around with a fake world title.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's just, you know, and it's probably because they're used to going into towns and being like, who's the guy who's got a ring? And it's just a guy who, you know, he bought a ring so that he can run his own promotion. And they were like, I remember, I do remember thinking, being told by a guy at Impact, because they were like, you know, they paid me for the ring, and then they flipped it a little bit on me. They were like, and it was not a huge deal, but like it was a Friday, Saturday. They did San Francisco and Sacramento back to back. And it was tough because that San Francisco show, we had all these mats we had to do, and they had us get all these wrestlers to come in and like help with the show and do all this stuff on a promise that they could drop down a promo package and all this stuff. And you know, the guy was kind of helping me out with that. He's the one who kind of organized that with all the wrestlers, and they weren't super happy about that. They underdelivered what they said they were going to do. And then anyway, the next day, they spring it on me that night where they're like, hey, we have a TV spot at like 7 a.m. on Good Day Sacramento. Can you get there and set up the ring like at 5 a.m. or whatever? And I was like, I mean, I guess, you know, but we're not getting out of here till midnight. You know what I mean? And then so we did it. We're like, that's fine. I called my dad and I'm like, Dad, my brother, you know, I'm like, you guys got to come help me with this, you know, and they showed up and they weren't happy either. And I had this guy, Chris Richard, who was like the greatest, you know, the greatest wingman. Him and Tim Castelaw, those guys, I couldn't have ever run SWF without those guys. I
love both those guys. I miss Timmy.
They're brothers to me. I love them so much. And they came in and they never asked for anything. They just love to help. You know what I mean? But anyway, yeah, that day they all of a sudden I'm already a little ticked off because I was there and I had to cancel. I can't remember if I had to cancel work or something. I couldn't remember what I had to do. And then they're like, oh, by the way, we're also going to have a gut check today. We're going to use your ring for the gut check. And I remember saying to him, I was like, okay, hold on a second. You know what I mean? Like you're paying me for 2 shows. Now I've gotten here at 7 a.m. and now you're going to have a bunch of guys in my ring doing a gut check. You're going to get paid how much per guy to come into my ring? And I was like, listen, like that was not part of the original agreement. I feel like I'm getting underpaid now for what I've done.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I wasn't asking like pay me a bunch of money or I'm gone. I just kind of was like, I feel like you're really kind of taking advantage of my good graces here.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, what do you, and then they asked me, they were like, well, you were a worker, right? And I was like, kind of, like forever ago, you know? And they're like, well, why don't you come into the gut check? And I was like, I was in terrible shape. I hadn't worked in over a decade. I was like, look at me. Do you think that you think I'm in any, like, I want to run a gut check, you know? Yeah. And that's when they were like, you kind of look like, what was his name? The guy with the mask. Abyss. You kind of look like Abyss. And I was like, I don't know if that's a compliment or if that's not, like what that's supposed to be. I mean, thanks, but
compliment.
Was that?
I don't think that's a compliment.
They made it sound like it wasn't like you look like a bis. Have you ever thought about like getting in the ring? You want to go come do the gut check? And I was like, I'm in no shape to do a gut check. I don't. Yeah,
That's some carny bullshit right there.
Yeah. I was like, I'm in no shape. So I think they saw that I wasn't going to be that guy because I was like, I don't want to be on the gut check. I want to get compensated for my time, right? So they gave me a little more money, but I was told, I was like, hey, listen, I got to tell you, really appreciate the way that you've dealt with this. You weren't pushed around. Like it was actually, I think it might have been D'Lo actually, I can't remember because he was the agent on the show. And he was like, I really appreciate the way you handled this. Like, that was really great. Like, a lot of these guys kind of get pushed around. They just want to be here working with Impact. And I was like, thanks, man. I appreciate that. You want to get more? That's great.
Right. They think they're getting their shot or they're getting signed.
Right.
And you were like, no, I want my money.
Yeah. And so, but anyway, it actually ended up working out really well because then later we got to work with them again. And that was, and Bob Rosen, who's the ring guy. I still every once in a while talk to that guy. I was at AEW when CM Punk got, I took my sons to go see when CM Punk debuted at AEW in Chicago.
Right.
Bob Rosen's the ring guy now for AEW. And I was like front row. It was like this whole thing. And yeah, Bob caught me and we talked for a little while, and he's still the greatest guy ever. And so, it's cool that I was able to get all of that. But yeah, the thing that after a while promoting got really I kind of got burnt out on it because
it's one of those things. I say it all the time. Someone always says it the day of the show. Oh, are you excited for the show? And I say, I'll be excited when the ring's put away and the show's over.
Yeah, I would tell people when they would come and tell me, like, I'd have you'd always have friends that come to the shows and they're all excited and they come to me and they're like, dude, like, are you having a good time? And I was like, not really. No. I was like, look, here's the thing, right? I go, I have about 6 minutes of fun during this show. It's the main event. I know that nobody's going to get hurt. The ring's going to be fine. You know what I mean? Like no crowd is it, and it's about to wrap up. That is when I calm down for about 5 minutes. I watch the wrestling. I see the crowd happy. As soon as that bell hits, it's wrap everything up and get it out and try to be out before midnight. You know what I mean? And try to be back to home to go to sleep. And I'll count the money tomorrow. You know what I mean? And so after a while dealing with that, and then just the you know what this is like. You're trying to I never booked a show where all the wrestlers I booked originally were on the show when it happened. You know what I mean? Like one guy, two guys, they always can't make it for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, also, guys would, you'd agree on a payout. Then they'd call you back and be like, hey man, I was thinking about this and gas this and that. And it's like 2 days before the show, right? They wait until the day of or the day before when you can't find somebody else, or whatever. And, oh, I didn't know you had this guy booked. I see him on the flyer. I can't work on a show with this guy because he did this to me back in 4 years ago on this show in, Podunk, California. And I can't, and you just have all that stuff. And then on top of that, also, all the promoting, it's not like a show. Like, I don't think a wrestler really understands it unless they've actually promoted a show. Yeah. That it's like there's a reason why the promoter wants to make the most money. It's because it's not like they just show up the day of the show like they do. It's it's like a month-long thing. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And you're working with all these. I mean, I don't know how guys do it when they're wrestling and promoting. You know what I mean? Like
it's hard.
That's super tough. I did that one time in 2002, and I was
there.
Terrible. Yeah, you were there. You were on the show. Yeah. And
it's one of those things where now, because I've been around so long, it's a little more manageable. Mm-hmm. But I would love not to be on shows. If you actually look at the history of like Action Coast specifically, it's been basically 11 years, and I think it's 125 shows, I think. I've been on like 20 of them.
Yeah. Because it's
I've been
hard.
on everybody else's shows, but I would never be on my own. Or if I was, it was like a quick squash match, or, you know, maybe I just cut a promo or I did a run in. Like a lot of times I used to manage Sasha when Sasha was the champion. It was just easier for me.
Yeah.
You know?
And also for me, like, you know, when I did do it that one time, I just did it because I knew if I was on the show, a bunch of my friends would come and they'd pay, right? But
Right.
but when I started promoting afterwards, and some people asked me, like, do you want to get back in the ring? I think you even asked me that one time. You're like, you're gonna get back in the ring, and I just said, like, no, because I don't ever want anybody to think that I'm running this thing just to promote myself. You know,
Right.
like I didn't want to be that guy who was like the one out of shape guy that actually was I was the champ, like the guy you go to the show and you know he's the promoter because he's got the belt, but he's the one who doesn't look like a wrestler. You know, like
What was his name?
I don't know. Not naming anyone in particular. Not naming names.
Rob Wilds.
Oh yeah, Rob Wilds.
Jim Cooley.
You know, I gotta say, you know, I don't want this to become like a shoot interview, but like Jim Cooley and Rob Wilds, I feel like their hearts, at least when it came to me, their hearts were in the right place. I didn't like, I gotta say, Rob Wilds, when I first broke in, was so nice to me. And if I had to do it over again when I was 21, 22, I would have handled it differently with him. But like, you know, when I was 18, he stuck around after the show to kind of work with me a little bit. Not that he should have been, because he wasn't exactly trained himself, but his heart was in the right place. Same with Cooley, right? Like Cooley, he went out of his way a couple of times to kind of help me, you know. But the thing about Cooley that was hard for me was, man, he was such a worker, you know, like he was such a favor. Like you didn't know, I just never felt, yeah, I just never felt like I could trust him. Like there was this time where he was like, we should be a tag team. And I was like, why? You know what I mean? Like, why would I want to be a tag? I never wanted to be a tag team wrestler anyway, you know, but I was like, why would I want to be on a tag team with you? And in my head, I was like, because it was right when I was breaking in and I was on all the TV, right? And I was like, he wants to be in a tag team with me because he wants the rub from my promoting, you know, or from all my self promotion, right? Mm-hmm. But then I saw later the only reason he said anything was because my tights looked just like his, and so he was like, this is what I'm talking about. Like, we look like a tag team. And I go, you know, and so. And he also, like, you know, he offered when I came back from my mission to like put me on shows, and I just wasn't really interested in, you know, like, so I think their hearts were in the right place. They're just, their methods were a little shady, you know.
But that's 99% of everyone in wrestling. So
yeah, no, and I had my problems with both of them. Like, they both really gave me problems. I mean, Rob and I, you know, I think he spit on.
Hey, can we hold on for a second?
Yeah.
Take a quick break. I gotta go do something real quick.
Yeah, go ahead. I'll just keep talking while you're on, because this is live. So
right.
No, like when it comes to Rob Wilds, I think, if I'm not mistaken, he actually spit on me at a show, and it was partially my fault. I felt like that was a little bit much, but like, I went to his show. I was promoting a wrestling show. And I went to his show and started passing out flyers from my show at his show, which I later learned was a big no-no. I probably shouldn't have done that. Later, I got mad at other promotions for doing the same thing, just because that's what I was taught. And so, yeah, it was, he spit on me, and I was like, wow, you know, and I didn't know what really to do. Anyway, after that, we just we didn't talk for a while, because I just wanted to punch him in his face at that point. And but I didn't. I tried to keep it cool because I wanted to be professional. One of the few times back then that I was, and I walked away. And as a side, I called him and I said, hey man, listen, obviously that was wrong. I shouldn't have done it. I'm going to offer to you that if you want to come to my show and pass out flyers for your show, you can. and he didn't show up. He didn't want anything to do with it, and that was fine. But yeah, it just, I don't know. Like I said, Rob Wild's good guy. I mean, heart's in the right place, just weird methods, but a lot of those guys do.
And it was a different era too back then. Everyone was us against everyone else, and
Yeah,
there was a bunch of, I never got it, was if you work there, you can't wrestle here. And I was like, okay. I used to always say, guys, when guys would tell me that, I'd be like, okay, I just won't wrestle here. Bye.
Yeah. Well, and look, like, here's the thing, right? I mean, especially when the payouts are so low,
right?
You know what I mean? You're not paying rent. I think that's another thing that I like about where I am right now. I think if I had pursued it when I was 21, or 22, when I came back from my mission, I would have been working a lot of places I didn't really want to work, but trying to get the exposure. Here I'm in a position where I definitely want to go out there and wrestle, but I really just want to kind of wrestle with my friends. You know what I mean? And I want to like have those matches with you and Big Ugly and Flacco and like, and Butabi and Riv, and just like, kind of do these things that I never got a chance to do. And if I get to do something really cool, if I get like a cool opportunity comes up, like I would love to do it. But I'm not expecting anything. And I'm not looking to become a weekend warrior where I'm going to be like out every Saturday, doing double shots every weekend, trying to make it. You know what I mean? Right. It's just an opportunity for me to go out there and have some fun, stay in shape, kind of get some of my own personal artistic, performance out, and maybe do some stuff for good causes again, do charity stuff. And that's it.
Yeah.
It'd be fun.
You're kind of at where guys like me and Ugly and Mike Rain are at. Like, it's always like, you doing that show next weekend?
Yeah, no. But I have a list, and you're on it. I have a list of matches I want, and you're definitely on that list. So, but I don't know. Who knows? You may retire. Justin was on the list, and then he retired. So I don't know.
Well, it's one of those things like, I know I'll wrestle next year. Like, I know for sure, like, next year's probably going to be my last. I know. After that, it's probably going to be the Brock Lesnar schedule.
Right.
Two, 3 matches a year, moments that are important. Maybe work the Action Coast anniversary show every year, and then maybe 2 other times or something like that. But I know next year I'll wrestle. So you got a little time.
Oh, good. Yeah, right on. So let me ask you, and this is something, this podcast, I told you when we were off the air, like, I don't really know what this is going to be about. I just like talking to people about what makes them tick. And, what is it for you about wrestling that drew you? Were you always a fan, like lifelong? Okay. So,
so I think I can answer that in probably 2 parts. So, I think I was like 3 months old the first time I ever went to a show, something like that. I know it was like a baby, brand new, born. Obviously, I don't remember that or anything, but I'm old enough to remember when they taped at Channel 40 and did television. Wasn't long, but I still remember going, or I have like a vague memory of being really little and going with my grandfather. But I think my first real, like, wow, that's cool, I was probably 7, 6, something like that. I don't remember who it was, but I remember seeing it on TV. And my cousin Jason, who was probably 3 or 4 years older than me, was like, "You don't know about wrestling?" I'm 6. What the hell do I know? And me going, no. And we watched, I don't know, 2 hours of wrestling that day. And the next weekend, because we were always together on the weekends, I was like, when's that thing on? I didn't even know what it was called. And It was, I think it was what was, I think it was the show that ended up being WCW Saturday Night, and it was like the 3:05 Eastern here in California show.
Yeah.
And I was just captivated by it, and I didn't understand. And then it was soon after that was Superstars, and but why are these guys not on the other TV show? I didn't understand that at all.
Yeah.
Um,
Real quick before you go on, I recently watched an old episode. I don't think it was WCW Saturday Night. I think it was Jim Crockett Promotions.
well, yeah, that's probably what it would have been back then. Yeah.
But I watched that recently on YouTube, and it's so funny that looks a lot like what indie wrestling looks like now. You know what I mean? Like, you look at indie wrestling, and because you're so used to now watching Monday Night Raw, that like you look at that and you're like, that looks kind of janky, right?
Mhm.
But that's exactly like, now watching that, I was like, man, I have a lot more respect just by watching that YouTube show. I have a lot more respect for things that like Action Coast, East Bay, All Pro Wrestling, these guys, Next Level Pro, who are like putting on weekly shows on YouTube or wherever they're doing it. That I was like, that looks like something that I'm seeing these other places. There's not a ton of people in the crowd. It's all TV. They're promoting it, and they have Ric Flair and Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard going and doing TV in front of like 50 people.
Yeah.
And I was
that's
like,
how they made money.
Right. And I just was like, man, that's so crazy that it looks like that. Anyway, so
because back then local TV was how you sold house shows, or what we call house shows now.
Yeah.
And that's how they got paid was, people don't know that a lot of times they didn't get paid for that.
Yeah, and the house shows back then, the house shows mattered because you never really got to see big matches on TV. Now every week everybody's wrestling everybody. But if you wanted to see Hulk Hogan wrestle the Macho Man, you either had to watch WrestleMania or go to a house show. Or Saturday Night's Main Event every once in a while.
Right. And that was, but that was the thing. So I was real young when I got captivated by wrestling. And, fortunate enough for me, that was the same era when the action figures started coming out with soon after. I had them all. I don't know where they are, but I had them all. And it was
did you have the big LJN ones, or did you have the little ones that could actually move?
The big rubber ones.
Yeah, the LJN ones. Yeah. Those are, if you can find them, in box, those suckers are so expensive on eBay.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But that was a thing, and it became like an obsession. And then it was, soon after we go to the grocery store and there'd be the magazines, and I'd throw a fit if I couldn't get, the Pro Wrestling Illustrated or whatever the magazines were back then. I got them all. I remember, I wish I had kept them, but I remember having a box of them, and just, they were 10 years old and they were just in the box. I kept every copy, and I became like a drug addict for pro wrestling. I couldn't get enough of it. You know? And it was,
it's in the blood, doesn't it?
And if you remember the old days, I think it was whatever the Saturday morning WWF show was that Superstars.
Yeah, Saturday Morning Superstars.
Like, they used to show it on Sunday, and it was the same exact episode.
Yeah.
And I would still watch it, even though I knew everything that was going to happen.
Yeah.
And then cable, and it was finding the NWA, or what became WCW, was, I think, a blessing, because it was, they had the Friday Night Power Hour. There was the 305 show on Saturdays, and then there was the 305 show on Sundays, and they were like 2 or 3 hours long.
Yeah, those were long ones.
And then they would have the what was it, like Super Clash or Clash of Champions or something, that would be like
every once in a while. It'd be twice a year.
Like the free pay-per-view on TBS, and it was like, this is awesome. And then, and I mean, I was still a WWF guy too, but like, and then the AWA was on ESPN at one point, and it was like I couldn't get enough of that. And if you remember right, Channel 58 had, I think it was called the AWF or the something like that, and it was like when guys would leave the WWF and they wouldn't go to Crockett, they would go there, but it was on Channel 58 here. And it was always like, why is Bob Orton not? Wait, what?
Why is he not Cowboy Bob Orton?
Yeah. And then 4 or 5 months later, he'd be back on TV. It was like, wait, isn't he on the other channel? Like, what's going on?
Yeah.
I didn't understand. They weren't all the same people.
Yeah. The cool thing about, I remember when I first started watching the NWA too, I think the first time I saw an NWA match was I went to the video store. Kids' video stores were places you used to go to rent movies before Netflix.
It's where you used to go rent YouTube.
Yeah, exactly. And they had like an old school, I think it was a War Games tape. And I watched that and I was mind blown. I mean, just because it was such a difference, because the WWF was all about these big cartoony characters that would wrestle 10-minute to 15-minute matches. But then you'd watch NWA or WCW, and it'd be Ric Flair and Ricky Steamboat going for a 60-minute Broadway, and it was like a completely different thing. It was all centered around the wrestling. It wasn't necessarily about the story. They had the top 10, so it was all about guys. It was all about trying to get to the belt. That was it. It was just guys fighting to, wrestling to win. And
to add to those 60-minute matches that ended in no contest, they do a 20-minute angle right after to set up the next guy to fight Flair.
Yeah, and then they would do things like, and then they would do these just dastardly things to Dusty Rhodes or like the Road Warriors, you know what I mean? Like all these guys. And then I remember how cool it was when like, the Legion of Doom showed up in the WWF, and you're like, oh man, this is going to be great. When they finally started switching back and forth. And so that was a really cool time. And I remember I was so rabid back then. I was on a year-round schedule for school. I think I was probably in 4th or 5th grade. And on ESPN, they had like Global Wrestling Federation or something like that. And that is where Marcus Bagwell and the Harlem Heat and 1-2-3 Kid, that's where they all got their starts. They were there with Hot Stuff. Eddie Gilbert was one of their main guys. I think Buff Bagwell was like the handsome stranger wearing a mask, and like the Harlem Heat was called like something different. And but yeah, it was like those guys coming up. And I remember when they all started showing up. They had this guy Chris something. He showed up to WWF for a hot minute, but they had all these guys that were like, it was before they got big, and then those guys all showed up. It was a great time, to be a wrestling fan, but like, what was it about wrestling that appealed to you?
Oh, the pomp and circumstance.
Yeah.
Like I will always say that Flair was probably the one that caught my eye as far as the robes and the hair and the way he walked and the way he talked, and just nothing to do with wrestling. That was it for me. It was like, I don't know what this is, but I love it. When I was young, I was terrified of Harley Race, and like would hide behind my pillow when Harley Race came on TV because he just terrified me. But Andre didn't, for whatever reason. I loved Andre,
Yeah.
It was Andre was the big cuddly bear until he beat up Hulk Hogan,
Right. God, that was so huge.
And it was just, and even like guys like the Macho Man, the robe, the promo, the antics, the everything about them before they even got in the ring was what I fell in love with. And then
I remember that WrestleMania 3. I remember being at the old time Arco Arena, like not the room just got down, but the old school one, watching it on a big screen, and it was filled. Like they filled 93,000 people in the Silverdome, but Arco Arena was full of people who bought tickets to watch it on a big screen. I mean, and I remember the crowd. That was when, so I remember thinking when I first watched wrestling on TV, I thought, this is kind of dumb. But I thought it was kind of dumb, not because of the wrestling, but because I couldn't see. This sounds so stupid now, but I remember being like, you can't even see the guys through the ropes. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And so, but then my aunt took me to my first wrestling match, and I later told Brutus Beefcake about this. Brutus Beefcake and Greg Valentine against the British Bulldogs in a steel cage. It's the only match I remember. It was the main event.
Yeah.
And I lost my voice. And then I remember we went to WrestleMania 2, but what I really remember is WrestleMania 3, 2 moments where I was like, that's what I want to do. Was the first one was the crowd went nuts on the finish for Ricky Steamboat and Randy Savage on WrestleMania 3, like the quick small package finish.
Right.
And everybody went nuts because they had that was the first time where there was like 1,000 false finishes in a match. You know what I mean? Right. And there were times where they were so close that the crowd cheered like they thought he actually got the 3 count. You know, it was that good. But then when Hogan slammed Andre and the crowd at Arco Arena, you felt the shaking of the whole. I mean, when he body slammed him, I was like, that's just what I got to do. You know, I want to be one of those guys. And so I was a Hulkamaniac from that moment on.
Did they have a ring set up?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so.
For some reason, I thought they did, but maybe that's just like a.
No, I don't think they did. No, I don't know. But I remember how that felt, and that was what it's so cool is like you hear that saying, right, where like people don't remember what you say, but they'll remember how you make them feel. Like, that was the thing about wrestling was it made me so energetic at a time when I really needed it. Like, you know,
I was that kid that was. When I was younger, I was always. I mean, I was jumping on my bed and getting in trouble for it, and like, come on. And then as I got older, I started rooting for all the bad guys. And it was like, yeah, get him, you know. But so that always brought those emotions out in me. As a fan, it's like, you know, when your sports team wins, and you throw your hands in the air, it's almost like the same thing that pro wrestling gives you.
Yeah.
At least in the old days it did.
You know, my parents, this is honest truth. My mom got rid of all the bed frames in our room, in our house, because we had broken so many beds with power bombs. I had power bombed my brother through every bed we owned from about the age of 8 on. From Sid and Psycho Sid Vicious, because his power bomb was vicious.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it was so, and so I was just power bombing everybody. I got in trouble for one time because I power bombed one of my brother's friends. I mean, like, you know, I just was always wrestling. You know, I was always wrestling these guys. But no, the thing that was interesting was that like that kid deserved it, by the way. But but
see, at least you were safe. I used to DDT everybody. Sometimes that didn't turn out very well.
That kid was a little punk, and he deserved to be power bombed, and he got it. And
What's his name? Say his name.
I'm not gonna say his name, but
say his first name.
His name was Eric, and he deserved it.
Eric, you were an asshole.
But anyway, the thing that I think that for me was like, you know, my dad and I, we have a great relationship now and have for a really long time. But when I was growing up, he had his demons and he had some struggles. And so when he had those struggles, there were times when he was kind of in and out. And you know, he's a great guy. He was a great provider when he was on. And you know, he's been the last 25 years, he's been everything of a father that you would ever imagine. But at the time, it was really rough, and I had trauma from it. And it was And so having a guy like Hulk Hogan get up there and say things like train, say your prayers, eat your vitamins, like be kind of that father figure, that hero, who like the Hogan versus Giant Andre match was really just David and Goliath, and you're seeing there, I didn't think of it like this at the time, but it's like when you see Hulk Hogan try to body slam him at the beginning of the match, it not work. And then he has this terrible match the whole time. And then at the very end, he finally gets him in that body slam, this giant man who you don't believe he can do it. And he does it. It's just one of those things where you're like, I can, whatever Andre the Giant Goliath I've got in my life, I can do it too. And it just kind of gave you, it sounds so corny and stupid, but like it gave you this hope. And that's why, like Hogan, I don't care how many times he's almost out and he kicks out and does his Hulk up and his 3 punches, boot, and a leg drop. I'll cheer for it every single time, because it takes me back to that time. It was a time when I really needed it, where like I felt like I had a bunch of Goliaths in my life as a really young kid.
Yeah.
And seeing that really really helped me, and that was his story, right? They always got bigger, it was Big John Studd, then it was King Kong Bundy, then it was Andre the Giant, then it was Earthquake. It was all these gigantic men, and he was Typhoon, all those guys.
Yeah, and I think, but that was the point, though.
Yeah,
you were the demographic for that.
Oh, big time, big time. And when I got older, I started really enjoying like watching guys who could just put on great matches. Like I looked forward to like watching Mr. Perfect or like watching Bobby Eaton, or watching Ric Flair matches. Those types of things.
I think just talking about guys like that, I wish I would have gotten to see Gino Hernandez. Because like, everything I've ever heard about Gino was like, he was like Tully and Flair put together.
You know what? If I had a time, if I could go back and pick any wrestler that I would love to watch live, I would have loved to seen the reaction to Gorgeous George back in the 50s. Dude, that guy, I mean, I have an old, I don't have it now, but I used to have an old VHS of like Golden Age Wrestling. And they had like Antonio Roca and Killer Kowalski, and they had Gorgeous George.
Yeah.
And when he would pull his when the ref would come over to him, he was so good. The ref would come over to him when to check him for foreign objects, right? And he get your filthy hands off me, and the crowd would go crazy. I mean, that guy was just, he knew he was a worker.
Oh yeah,
like before he was ahead of his time. Is so good at that. I mean, it's great. And he didn't do much in the ring. You know what I mean? He didn't have to do much. And so,
I mean, hell, that guy was such a good worker. He got his wife to shave her head for a match.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, man, what a. Now let me ask you
$6,000.
Yeah, let me ask you this. I've thought about this a lot. You think that being involved in wrestling now has kind of killed the magic for you?
It's sort of a yes and a no answer. So, like when I'm at shows, obviously you know what the booking meeting is.
Yeah.
I hate them. I don't want to know who's going to win or lose matches. So, when I watch matches, and I do watch most of them, I don't want to know. I want to be surprised. So for that part, like booking meetings, I'm always like, ugh, great. I don't do them. I talk to the wrestlers individually. Josh and Johnny, this is what you guys are doing tonight. So, and I always like to see what everyone's going to do, what creativity they're going to do to make themselves stand out. But the excitement for pro wrestling, like as a fan, is not there anymore.
Yeah, sometimes
I don't sit down and watch whatever one of 400 hours of pro wrestling every week and think, I'm really excited to watch this.
Yeah. Like, for me, big moments still get me. Like being there at AEW and watching the crowd go crazy when CM Punk debuted. That was special, right? And I did that specifically because I was like, I feel like there's so few of those moments anymore in wrestling that I wanted my kids to see it once, and they did, right? And like going to WrestleMania, like I went to WrestleMania 31 with my oldest. He was like 9 at the time. And it was just so fun to watch, like Seth Rollins, you know, cash in a Money in the Bank and stuff like that, like the little surprises that happen.
That was the San Francisco one.
Yeah, that was the one in San Francisco. And then, you know, seeing Sting wrestle Triple H and then the NWO come out in DX, like that was all fun just on the nostalgia part, right? But yeah, like I remember, in fact, back at ProAm, this kind of killed it for me. Is right after I was started training there, Scott Hall turned on Kevin Nash. And I remember thinking to myself, I was pissed because I love the red. I love the red and black NWO.
Yeah.
And I love the Outsiders. I've always been a Kevin Nash mark. Like I like him a lot. And so when that happened, I remember coming to training the next day and talking with Bocce about it. And we were both kind of like, dude, I couldn't believe it. But then, you know, Schizo and another guy kind of like made fun of us for being marks, you know, and like we were still fans, you know what I mean? But I remember then from that, I was just kind of like, oh, I guess I'm not supposed to, like, if I'm in the business, I'm not supposed to get excited about this stuff anymore, you know? And so I kind of like it. And then as I started learning how the business worked and saw kind of, kind of saw how it really works backstage and like being at the things and seeing how these shows work and seeing how the guys are in the back versus how they are in the front. It's just like at this point, like a match, I look at a match and it's rare that I get that same excitement, like for a heel turn, right? I don't get that same excitement that I used to get. My kids get it, my kids get excited about it, but it's kind of gone. And I wonder how much of that is just being older, or how much of that is just being smartened up to the business,
I think I'm going to add a caveat too. I also think I don't know if my enthusiasm is the right word, but I don't like the way a lot of the wrestlers treat fans on the indies.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's guys who are very big baby faces to fans, and they treat the fans in like meet and greets like shit.
Mm.
And I'm always like, why? Like, I was the biggest heel, and I've never once been like, I'm not signing an autograph.
Yeah, and also, especially on an indie scene, like it's so hard to draw, at an indie show. There's very few guys out there that truly draw big money, So if you get, 200 people at a wrestling show, 300 people at a wrestling show, and they just want to come and take a picture with you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, why would you? I mean, I think on that stage, you should be grateful. At least I think for me, I would just be grateful that they were willing, out of all the content out there in the world right now to do.
Yeah.
That they chose to come and support indie wrestling. I would do everything I can to make that the best experience possible,
Mm-hmm.
and, everybody's different, but I feel, especially like I know I've run into a lot of fans, over the years, and I know some of these guys do not have a lot of expendable income, and they're using it to come and see you and pay for not only a ticket, but like a $20 t-shirt or a $10 promo pick. And all they want to do is meet you. You're that famous to them. Yep. I don't know why you'd want to not.
I've never gotten it. Never once. Like, I'm sure, I don't remember you ever doing this, but a lot of times you'll be at shows and it'll be intermission and the promoter or the booker will be like, baby faces go out to intermission. And I was like, why can't the heels go out?
Yeah.
We got merch to sell.
Yeah.
Maybe if you got hurt on the show, stay in the back. But like, I've always gone out intermission.
Yeah.
Unless I wasn't supposed to be there, or I wasn't on the show yet, or whatever. But I'd always go at intermission, and sometimes I'd be MJF and be a dick, but I'd be a dick in character, not a dick trying to sell T-shirts.
Right. Well, I also, and another thing is also that's something when I tell people, because I know a lot of people who are like, oh, I've been to a WWE show, but they've never been to an indie show.
Yeah.
And one of the big selling points, especially for people with kids like me, I tell them, I go, take your kids, because the wrestlers are so much more accessible on an indie show than they are in the WWE shows. Yep. They're walking around, you'll meet them, they'll be selling merchandise at the table, they'll take pictures, they'll autograph things. That's one of the selling points of indie wrestling, is you feel close to the guys, you feel close to the workers, and you get a chance to really meet them and see what they're like. And so I just, like I said, everybody's different. Maybe somebody had a bad day, but I just really hope that that everyone would do everything they can to make it a good experience.
Oh, the guys I'm talking to have been dicks for years. Did you ever go to the church shows that were up in Yuba City?
No, I remember. Wasn't that Tony
Dreamer?
Tony Dreamer was the guy. He was also on one of the original SPW shows.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember what it was called. I think it was UCW.
Yeah.
They did it right. They used to, when the show was over, they used to do a meet and greet.
And
they'd put people at tables. And it'd be like two heels and two faces, but you weren't at the same table. Like, it'd be like kind of next to each other. And I used to always, am I doing it in character, or am I just being a nice guy? Like, tell me now. And it was like, oh, no, just sign autographs, or whatever they have, just sign. Okay. And it wasn't like maybe you were selling merch, but they'd have like little kids would come up with pieces of papers and just regular ballpoint pens, and you would sign your name. And that was it. You didn't really have to talk to them. So I always thought they did it right. It was always like, oh, okay.
Yeah, man, that's a lot of fun. That's a lot of fun that they would. I mean, we tried to do that too. Impact did something that I really liked, and I was like, man, that is genius. So they would do the main event. It'd always be a championship match. I think it was always Jeff Hardy at the end. Well, they usually ended with Jeff Hardy, but what they would do is they had like this little machine that was like they had a camera that was hooked to a computer that was hooked to a machine that took kind of like Polaroids, right? And at the end of the show, they'd have Jeff Hardy or the champion or whatever in there, and they'd be like, we have a special deal right now where you and your entire group for $20 or $10 could come in and get your picture with Jeff Hardy. And man, half of the crowd would wait. I was getting ticked. That was another reason why I wanted more money, because I'm like, there's like 400 people walking through on their regular shoes on my canvas. I gotta get this thing washed now. You know what I mean? But I remember seeing all these people, and I'm like, and I was doing the math. I'm like, I started counting how many groups were coming in, and I was like, that's 200 people at $20 a pop. That's an extra $4,000.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, just in pictures, and it's not taking them much of anything. You know what I mean? And so I remember thinking to myself, I'm like, I need to get one of those machines, but the machine at the time was like 10
Gs. Yeah.
And so I was like, I can't do that. But
now they're like $30 on eBay.
I know, that's what I'm saying, is that now you could do something like that and really make it good, because you figure on an indie show, you just have the champion with the belt at the end. He takes the pictures, you give him a cut of the money that comes through for being the one to stand there. You know what I mean? Give him some money, and and it's a good way to make some money on the show, and just so that you can go ahead and replace your canvas, your ropes, or, get better lighting or whatever it is. And man, there's so many ways that you could really make good money on this stuff, but people just don't think about that.
There's so many ways to attract people without really advertising a big show.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask you, who do you think right now, if you had to name like 5 guys or girls who you think are kind of like the up and comers right now that you really need to watch, who do you think those are?
When you say up and comers, like new people in the business or people who maybe are breaking out?
Both. I mean, I think either one. Who are some people that you're like, if I were coming to an indie show, these are the people that I'm really excited to see what they do.
Oh, in that case,
like breaking out, like you think that they're going to break out and really be big.
Cliff Hendricks.
It's
probably pretty close to like one of my favorite wrestlers and has been for, I don't know, he's been around 3 or 4 years now. There's a reason that I put him over in his first match, and he didn't know. I don't think I haven't told you that story. I really liked him when he was training and he was doing all his little training matches, and Anton Voorhees was his trainer, and they said, we want you to do his first like official match. I said, okay. And I walked up to Anton, probably, I think it was the night before at Hood Slam, and I said, hey, I got something to tell you about tomorrow. And he thought I was like not going to show up or something. And I said, I'm putting Cliff over, but don't tell him. Don't tell Maynard either. And so his finish was the Swanton, and he pinned me, and I grabbed him so he wouldn't try to like get off of me when I was supposed to kick out. And I was like, congratulations, 1, 2, 3. And I rolled out of the ring, and I remember he wasn't doing anything, and I had to tell the referee, I was like, tell him to fucking celebrate. You know? So I really like Cliff. I think Cliff is like, you know, he went down, he got like more training at the Nightmare Factory with Cody Rhodes and QT. Obviously, Zoe, you know, there's a reason he's my champion. You know, I always say I think you would agree that if my champion ended up going somewhere bigger and better, it only makes your company look better.
Right.
I love the way Zoe works. He's got a good attitude. He's never had he's never told me no about anything. Not that I'm a difficult person, but I always have a good time with him. When she's healthy again, Aaliyah. Aaliyah, I think she's Aaliyah Mia Sweets. Everyone knows her as that. When she comes back, I think she's just going to blow up. I mean, she was money from the beginning. She's, 21, I think. Maybe she's 22, something like that. So she's got tons of time to be a pro wrestler. She's dedicated. I feel like the second she comes back, you better book her a year in advance because you're not going to get her. See, man, you put me on the spot. I'm drawing blanks on Juicy. I mean, shit, Juicy's all over the place. He's, you know.
I remember seeing him. He had just debuted, and I came to an East Bay show, and they were cutting promos at the beginning before the show started.
We were sitting next to each other.
Yeah, and I remember looking at you and being like, he's like Dusty Rhodes.
You
know, and he has a charisma about him. And that was before he'd gone off and done the stuff with Bad Luck Fale and all that, and gone down to Australia or wherever he was. And New Zealand, right. And then he came and then he did his match, and I was like, dude, that guy has money. And now he's doing the thing in MLW with Jacob and I can't remember who the other guy is. But yeah, that's awesome.
Yep, and he's at GCW too, Game Changer, and so he's done really well for himself. And I mean, he's still, what is he, like 25? I think. Yeah, super young. Like, God, I wish I was 25 again.
Right.
You know, Fab. Fabuloso Fabricio. Sorry, easy for me to say. That guy is money. How he is not signed anywhere amazes me. Guy has a look. He can cut a promo. He's bilingual. He's built like a fucking brick shithouse. He's a phenomenal wrestler. if you backstage, he can take care of himself. I think he's a guy that's going to be another guy. I think he's 23 or 24, so he's going to blow up real quick. Man, there's so many people that right now I'm just drawing a blank on, but a bunch of good talent. I mean, there's guys too, like it always has amazed me that Dave Dutra isn't signed somewhere.
Yeah.
Dave was a really good wrestler and has a look, and but I think he's just that one opportunity away from being a star, a big star.
Yeah, it's actually your show. So I was looking for a guy. I had as my champion Dylan Drake, who was great. He was really good, and he was a good placeholder for the belt. And I remember seeing Dutra work. It was the first time I saw him one time before that, and he was playing a baby face. He came out to Green Day, and he was kind of like a basic baby face, And then he turned heel, and it was your show. He worked. I'm forgetting his name, but he's the guy from the UK.
Kay Jutler.
Yeah, Kay Jutler. Yeah, I really like that guy a lot, and he worked Kay Jutler on your show at that the baseball place, the batting cages, and I just looked at him and I go, that guy, how is he not the top guy somewhere? And so I remember talking to him, being like, hey, I want you to. He had just moved to SAC, and so I was like, I go, you're here, so that's perfect. I'm only like 15 minutes away from you. I'm running shows in Sacramento. I want you to be my top guy. And he's like, yeah, because he was looking for that place, and he really grew into his own.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was the show. When he won the belt at our show, I mean, there were people throwing stuff in the ring. They were angry, I was like, this is because it wasn't one of our biggest shows. It was one of our smaller shows.
Was that the one at the place with the slanted roof?
It was in Carmichael at the La Sierra Community Center.
Yeah, that place.
Yeah. And but yeah, when he won the belt, the people were throwing stuff in the ring. And so it was great. I mean, and I was like, oh, we got something here. And he really became, in my mind, he became a draw. In Woodland, people loved him when we would do the Woodland shows.
I mean, those are great.
He would draw. I mean, he was legitimately a draw. People legitimately wanted to see him win, and that's why I kept the belt on him the entire time, because I was building it up, and I was gonna because I wanted it to be meaningful when he lost.
Right.
And then I just never found the guy to beat him.
Right.
So,
there's another guy that's just like him too, Wise Guy.
Yeah. Nick too. Like he's another one.
I know he did some dark stuff recently for AEW, but I don't know, because he's not very tall. I don't know. I mean, dude looks great. I mean, you can't.
I mean, the guy's been to like 1,000 dark things at WWE, and they just have like he's been in commercials with Big Show, like you know what I mean? He's been all over the place.
Wasn't he the guy getting punched in the opener of SmackDown for like 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, he's been, and he looks like $1 million. Yep. I mean, he really does, and he knows how to work. The last show I did the one in Orangevale. He and Dutra were the main event, and they killed it. They were light years above. I mean,
yeah, that was a very good match. I was there for that.
And everybody who came and worked that show, they were all great, right? All of them. They're all good workers. But I got to tell you, for a main event, that was money. I mean, the people who come to my wrestling shows are not your typical indie show crowd. Right. So I asked them afterwards what their favorite matches were, just so I can see, like, casual fan, who do they like, right? 9 times out of 10, it was everybody remembered the twins, but everybody said their favorite match was Dutra versus Wise Guy.
Right.
And it was like, I mean, even you could just see in the backdrop that Wise Guy, the Dutra gave Wise Guy, it was like, these guys are pro wrestlers, So, and now they're doing it, I know now they're doing the Border Patrol gimmick for Gabe, and they're doing real well with that. So
the Revolution?
Yeah, Revolution. Yeah, so they're doing that too. So let me ask you this. What do you think? I ask everybody this. What is your starting today? Uh, what do you think your in life, wrestling, whatever you want to say? What do you think your biggest success has been?
I I think wrestling wise, it will always be the fact that I'm still wrestling. I think is my biggest success.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, the guys I can name that have been around 20 years that are still around are Ugly, Doc, Flacco. I think Dante at this point is 20 years. I know Mike Rain's coming up on 20 years. There's, not a lot of people, that I can name after that. Robbie Phoenix, I think, down in LA, Joey Chaos down in LA. Everyone else is gone, man.
Yeah.
And, they're just not in the business. They're not alive. Um, it's really tough, So, like, to say I had longevity in something is, my wrestling career has been longer than most pro athletes' career. And
Yeah.
granted, it's not the same, but my life's probably been harder than most baseball players or more basketball players, not football and not hockey. But, I think personally, I'm healthy. Um, I've had some injuries, but I was never an injury plagued guy when it comes to wrestling. So that's a definite accomplishment. Um, I think some people know, some people don't. I have businesses that people don't even know about that run and are very successful, that I manage sort of very from a distance.
Mm.
Um, I not that I know of, but I stayed single the whole time, and because I never wanted to have that relationship that pro wrestling a lot of times ruined.
Mm-hmm.
So
I was going to ask you about that because I know you've never. I mean, I've known there's been a few times that since I've known you that you've had like a significant other for a while,
yeah,
but you've never. I don't remember you ever being in like a long-term serious relationship with anybody. Not even getting close to getting married. And I was wondering if that was a plan or if that just kind of happened or you just haven't found the right person yet.
um, again, it's sort of like being a backstage person. I mean, to never get married or never have kids was never a plan. Um, but I saw very early on what wrestling did to relationships,
Hmm.
and I was on the road a lot.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I tell everyone there was times I was wrestling 7 times a week
Mm-hmm.
because you could wrestle in somewhere on a Tuesday and somewhere on a Wednesday and somewhere on a Thursday and 3 times on a Friday and 4 or 5 times on a Saturday if you were, you know, LA. And I saw what wrestling did to relationships. I couldn't tell you how many people that I couldn't even count how many marriages they've had. And
Mm.
I'm like, I don't want to be that person. I also never wanted to be the person that was like leaving their kids. Because I think if I had a kid, I wouldn't have stayed in the business.
Well, quite frankly, that was part of the reason why
Yeah.
when I got back from my mission, um, my reality had changed. Like I knew I wanted to have a family. I wanted to have kids, and I saw.
And I think that was for me was I wasn't sure I wanted to have kids.
Mm,
Um, and again, I was on the road a lot. I, and I think, and like I said earlier, wrestling was like a drug to me. I was never a drug guy. Beer, yes. Drugs, no. I mean, I did them, but I wasn't addicted to them like a lot of guys. And kids were going to take away from me being able to wrestle. And I was going to have to make a choice.
yeah,
It was either going to be wrestling or kids. I chose wrestling.
yeah,
And you're right. In my really, if we're going to talk about serious relationships, I'd probably say the one I'm in now is probably the most serious one I've ever been in.
Mm.
And I probably had one other one many, many, many years ago that was, I think I thought was serious, and I think it was going towards seriousness. But she was also in the business, and those things don't mix.
Yeah.
So
That's a mess.
yeah.
That
How
never
people,
ends.
well,
It's funny how that never ends well.
right?
You know?
How like people like Kimberly or Kimmy Diamond and Merrick make it work. More
Yeah.
power to them, you know. And I know
Yeah.
there's others, but
That was, I remember telling somebody that. I remember them saying, like, I remember someone saying something about, well, I don't, we don't have a lot of common interests. I don't like pro wrestling. I'm like, that's okay. I don't want a girl who likes pro wrestling. I've seen, like, that's not the type of lifestyle I want. You know what I mean? Like, that was the big thing for me when I did the one show, and I was like, I could make this successful. I could do this. But I was like, I also talked to some of the guys, who had been around, and they're like, if you want to be married, like you don't know where your wife is most of the time. Like, you're not going to your kids' soccer games on Saturdays. You got a show. You're missing birthdays, you're missing Thanksgiving, Christmas, you're not around. And it's like that all the time. It's better now, but even now it's like that. Like WWE, they do 4 on 3 off, which is better than it used to be, but that's still, can you imagine being gone? I can't imagine being like, I have a hard enough time right now being away from my kids when I am like, could you imagine every single week without fail, 4 days, you have 4 days on and then a half a day flying wherever you're at, and then another half a day getting back to where your next place going. So you really got maybe if you're lucky, a day and a half with your kids every single week. And I just didn't want that. I knew I wanted to have kids, and I'll tell you right now, like, as much as I loved wrestling and I was obsessed with wrestling, I'm more obsessed with my kids. Like, I spend as much time as I can with them. Like, I've recognized recently how fast. I mean, we've been talking about how we've known each other for 24, 25 years now, and I can't believe that. It feels like it's been maybe a few,
right.
I've recently, especially with all the stuff going on in my personal life and stuff like that, I've realized how finite these relationships really are, and how little time we have. I have a son who's turning 16 next month. I've got him for 2 more years and he's gone, and so it's like, man.
Well, and that's like my brother's oldest daughter. She just committed to South Carolina to play softball for the Gamecocks.
I saw that. Congratulations.
And I was like, wait, how old are you? Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
16 plus. She'll be 17 in February. And it's like, we're not that old. Like,
it's so interesting because, I don't feel that old. I mean, granted, now I feel like I'm in better shape now than I was most of my late 20s and all the way through to my late 30s. Like,
right.
I'm in better shape now than I was for a long time.
Right.
But at the same time, you sit there and you think about, like, I just took my son Tuesday to go see Roger Waters, at Golden One. And that was an interesting concert. Dude's old, but he can still put on a show. I mean, but like I was talking to my son about, like, we were talking about, like, girls, you know what I mean? And like talking about relationships, with everything going on in my life. Like, he's I have a lot of questions about relationships, and I'm like sitting there and I'm talking to him about these things, and I'm just going like, I can't believe that I'm sitting across from a 16-year-old who is 2 years away from becoming an adult.
Yeah.
And that's why, like, you see, if you were to follow me on social media, on Facebook or Instagram or whatever, every picture I have, it feels like is me spending time with my kids, because I know they're going to be gone soon. He's already to the point where, like, if he had a choice between me and his friends, he's going to choose his friends. You know what I mean? And I'm okay with that. That's where he's at.
Now,
I got 3 more younger than him that I can hang on to,
So and you don't drink, but you feel really old when somebody at a bar walks up to you and says, oh, aren't you my friend, my parents' friend?
Yeah.
And then
Oh
it's like,
god.
oh, I'm little Johnny. And it's like, wait, who? Who are you? And they start telling you, or your friend says, oh, it's so and so's 21st birthday. We're going to take him to club we used to go to. And it's like,
Oh, dude.
aren't they like 10?
When I have high school for like, I mean, usually I don't drink. You're not Mormon, so this may not translate to you, but like when you sit there and you have friends from high school who have kids that are going on missions.
Oh, well,
And
yeah.
you're like, are you kidding me? You know what I mean? You're old enough to have an 18, 19-year-old kid. And that's what I'm saying is that like I'm sitting here and I know what's coming for my son. And I'm like, okay, so he's gonna be 18, he's gonna go on a mission. I'm not gonna see him for 2 years. And then when he comes back, he's off. He's off to go start his life, which is great. But it just makes me realize, like, as I get older, like, I hate to say this, but God willing, I'm halfway through my life. You know what I
Oh,
mean?
yeah.
And, if I'm lucky, and I just sit there and I think it's gone so fast. And it's just like, so it's just, I try to spend every single moment I can. Like, this is why I'm doing the wrestling now. This is why I'm spending so much time with my kids, because these moments that we have when you're not dealing with garbage and pain and like all these things, life sometimes can just be full of that stuff. And so every moment you have where you can do something you're passionate about, and any moment you can spend with people you love, you should cherish that moment as much as you can. And it's just, and so like, yeah, obviously for you chose wrestling, and that's great because, you're not going to have that forever, and that's you. And who says you can't have kids now? Who said you can't have kids 5 years from now? I mean, I don't know if you want to do that, but
I don't know if I want to be the 83-year-old dad with a 16-year-old.
dude, my dad is that. My dad, not 83, but my dad is 56, and I have a 19-year-old sister. And it's like,
Yeah.
It's actually kind of funny because you're sitting there. I said this, I get a little jealous sometimes because I said earlier, my dad, he had a real rough go during my childhood, and it's kind of frustrating to see my sister grow up with the dad that I wish I had.
Right.
But he's almost kind of like a grandpa now. You know what I mean? So it's like my mom actually has a picture of all the grandkids on the wall, and my sister is on the grandkid wall. And we joke with her all the time about that. But like, yeah, I mean, so it's really cool that you've been able to find something that you're clearly been passionate about, and you've been able to do it for that long. What would you think? So next question now.
Yeah.
What do you think your biggest failure is?
It probably relationships. Because like you said earlier, you don't go to birthdays, you don't go to anniversaries.
Yeah.
You don't go see little cousin Joey's play or baseball game or whatever. I don't, I've had some good relationships, and I'm fortunate with the ones that I'm still friends with, that we still communicate and we're still buddies. But there are times where it's like, man, if we'd stayed together, we'd be together 18 years now. Maybe we would have kids and things like that. So probably that's my biggest thing that I failed at, was because I was always gonna choose pro wrestling.
Yeah.
It was probably 5 years ago was the first time I said, oh, I'm not going to take this booking. I'm going to go to a wedding.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think the whole time I was texting people, what's going on? Like, I needed that fix. Even if I wasn't there, I needed that fix.
Yeah.
I mean, even so, to prove a point, the last show that you ran, I left a funeral.
Yeah, I remember.
The last part of it.
I know, because you didn't work my show because of the funeral. You felt so bad about it. And I was like, dude, it's a funeral. Don't worry about it.
But I was like, I had to leave the funeral to go see at least part of your show.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember that. You came dressed to the nines. I think you were even wearing a cowboy hat, if I'm not mistaken. So, Maybe
I
not.
may have.
You were
Yeah.
wearing a suit. I know that.
I
But
know I had a suit on, but yeah.
yeah, that was crazy, man. It's yeah. The thing though is that failure's not permanent.
No.
You know what I mean? That's the beauty of it, is that just because things haven't worked out doesn't mean they're not going to. I think I can't remember who it was who said, like, failure isn't a failure if you learn something from it.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, relationships are tough anyway without
Mm-hmm.
wrestling. I mean, it's a constant fight, especially when you got people with, everyone's got trauma and everyone's got stuff going on, and it's hard to navigate that anyway. So,
Right.
like I said, at least you found something you're passionate about that you can, that you can, you can rely on, and it's always there for you.
Yeah.
That's great. So,
And I try to be passionate about everything. So
yeah, you got to.
Yeah.
This life is so short. You gotta be passionate about things. It's funny. I tell people this sometimes. I do a lot of mentoring for law students, and then I talk to a lot of people who, for whatever reason, especially people within my Mormon community. I tend to be the guy that people call when they're kind of in some sort of crisis, and we talk a lot of times. I talk about. I remember a guy one time when I was talking about wrestling, a friend of mine who's a lawyer, and I've known him for years. And he asked me about wrestling. And I remember being like, "Are you into wrestling?" And he goes, "No, I'm not. But I always love listening to you talk about wrestling."
Yeah.
He's like, "Because you're so into it." And I remember thinking, I was like, that's the thing. Like, it's so fun to hear, like, we've been talking for 2 hours and 15 minutes, and I don't know who's going to listen to this or who's not, but it's just fun to sit there and listen to people who are passionate about stuff,
Yeah.
talk about things. Like the last guy I had on my podcast, he's a guy I know. He's a hairdresser, and he loves records, and he loves music. And just listening to him talk about record collecting, I mean, that may not appeal to a lot of people, but it's what makes him tick. Alexis Darevko, it's part of the cool thing about the fact that you've been wrestling now for 20 something years is that it's part of your identity. You know what I mean? It's you identify as a wrestler,
And I think to add to that, it's one of those things that ask people what my real name is.
Right. I know, but I know, hey, this is your gimmick name. We're gonna go with that. Yeah.
Well, it's like it was. I sit on a couple board of directors for companies, and I had to ask. I said, "Hey, can all the paperwork, like the legal stuff I get, has to have my real name in it?
Mm-hmm.
Can all the thing like board of the director of entertainment, can it say Alexis Darevko?" And they said, "Why?" I said, "Well, it's sort of like my stage name. Just like Tom Cruise isn't his real name."
Yeah.
I said,
but he is Tom Cruise.
But he is Tom Cruise. And they were like, "Okay, that's fine." So you'll see board of directors and it says Alexis Darevko.
Right.
And I always just for me, it's my own little chuckle. Like,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But that's what's so cool about it is, like, what I loved about the last, of Jared Joyner, who's the guy who met with me, who I talked to last week.
Yeah.
Was that I love that he's a hairdresser and he just loves it. And that's just what he does. And it's how he identifies. He's a father of 3. He identifies as a father, and he identifies as a record collector.
My grandfather, my mom's dad, was a barber.
Yeah.
He loved it. And that was
the thing that's so great is that he was like sitting there listening to him talk about cutting and coloring hair, and like how he's not a barber because he likes all of the art that goes with cutting women's hair. It's just, and it's funny to hear his take on being like, when you're Mormon, you go to a new congregation, you meet all these new people, and he'd be like, "Yeah, he's like, I met everybody." And he goes, "And I tell people I'm a hairdresser, and then all the women want to talk to me about hair, and none of the guys want to talk to me at all. And then I show up at basketball, and I'm 6'8", and nobody thinks I can play basketball because I'm a hairdresser, but I'm actually really good at basketball." It's so funny to hear that. And I bet the same thing with you, you're a pro wrestler, and they're like, "Oh, that fake stuff," right? And then you got to correct them, and then they hear you're passionate about it, and then it gets them interested, and it's just so fun to hear that. So Man, that's awesome. Well, dude, we've been going for a long time. It's been we'll have you back on as I move forward. This is like I said, this is just we'll have some episodes where we have you come back on and we'll just talk about like what's going on in the world of wrestling. This was more indie centric, this one, but maybe we'll after WrestleMania or something, we'll get together and talk about what we liked and didn't like.
I'll actually have to watch wrestling.
I know, dude, that's another thing. I was just thinking about this, and I think this is a content problem. Before I go, I just got to say, I think it's a content problem. There's so much wrestling out there. I get overwhelmed thinking about it.
Yeah.
My DVR is filled with Raw, SmackDown, NXT, AEW, Ring of Honor, Impact, New Japan. And it's like, I only have so many hours in the day. Raw is 3 hours long. SmackDown's 2 hours long. AEW is 2 hours long, 2 nights in a row. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
How am I supposed to watch all that?
I watch everything on fast forward.
Yeah, and it's like, and I used to do that where I would just I would fast forward through what I don't want to see, but that's not cool because then you miss things that you don't, like who knows, you might have saw something great, or I'll read the dirt sheets and then I'll go back and watch it afterwards to hear what was interesting. But what I've lately been doing, because I've been so busy with training and then doing this and then my kids and everything else, that I've just been like relying on the video shots between each show on a pay-per-view to figure out what's going on. I turned on Raw last week and they had a tag team match and I'm like, I don't know who any of these guys are.
If I don't have time to watch, I'm a big podcast guy, and I think who Steve and Larson are, the Going in Raw podcast.
Yeah.
If I don't want to watch, I just listen to their podcast and then I go, oh, okay, that's what happened on Raw, or that's what happened on Dynamite or whatever.
Yeah. No, that's a good way to. Yeah, that's a good way to do it. But anyway,
that's an hour of them talking, and I can still do stuff while they're talking in my ear.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, right? You sit there and you watch. Like, I just don't have the time while I'm trying to get kids to go to bed and all that stuff to watch 3 hours of Raw. I just don't have it. So, but anyhow,
I don't know how anyone does it. I couldn't watch all 28 hours of wrestling every week.
I don't know, man. My youngest son, he's pretty on top of it. If he's not watching other people play video games on YouTube, he's watching that wrestling stuff. He's just
don't even get me started on that.
Yeah, I don't get it. But anyway, well, all right. Well, Alexis Darevko. Oh, plug your show. You got a show coming up. You got a couple of them.
So we have October 8th at the Vida de Oro off Arden Way. It's the old Wonder Bread building. Mm-hmm. And then
that's a cool little venue, by the way. I really like it. I mean, what's your capacity in that? Because you sell out most of the time.
It's like right around 90.
Okay.
Right around 90.
I mean, it's packed. Every time I've been there, it's packed. You packed.
It's like an old school television studio.
Yeah.
Wrestling television. That's why I like it.
Yeah.
And then we'll have another one December 10th. So our last 2 shows of the year, yeah.
Great. And is that kind of the plan now? Is you're going every other month at that place, or is it once a quarter? How's the?
We're doing every other month there, and that's kind of going to be the schedule there. Like I have other venues I'm looking at, so we'll probably be announcing shows in 2023. I'm not trying to run a ton, but I'd like to do once a month.
Yeah.
I don't.
Nice.
If I had my own building like East Bay does or Best of the West does, I'd probably run a little more, but there's so much wrestling going on. It's hard to get talent for one show every other month.
Yeah. Especially because, there's this Saturday, there's like 6 or 7 shows going on in Northern California, isn't there?
There's East Bay. There's the Yuba City show, Next Level. I think Best of the West has a show. I know Best of the West has a show. And I'm sure there's like 2 others I can't even think of.
Yeah, man, there's so many shows out there. But well, you got one then October 8th at the Via del Oro. I'm gonna try to make it out there, see what's going on. But yeah, man.
All your kids will really sell out.
Yeah, no kidding, right? But anyhow, well, all right. Well, it's been good with Alexis Darevko, and thanks for coming on, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for having me, Josh.